Hello, I'm Matt Toombs, the Director of International Climate Change at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero in the UK government. The UK is very pleased to be taking part in our multilateral assessment at COP28. In this presentation, I will explain the UK's 2020 targets under the Kyoto Protocol and the UK's progress against them. I'll explain our domestic climate framework and long-term target that helps deliver emissions reductions, and the latest progress since our multilateral assessment at COP26 in 2021. And finally, I'll reflect on the value the UK sees in the international assessment and review process, including reflections on the UK's recent expert review. The UK values transparency and the UNFCCC processes to ensure this. During 2022, the UK submitted its 8th national communication and 5th biannual report. In April 2023, we underwent the expert review, which we valued for improving our transparency. The expert team were impressed with the reports the UK submitted and noted improvements from our 4th biennial report submitted in 2020. I'll say a little bit more in the following slides. The UK's record of committing legally to reduce our domestic emissions goes back to our 2008 Climate Change Act. This set a target into law to reduce all emissions by 80% by 2050. It also established the Independent Climate Change Committee that provides advice on targets and progress reports. More on that in a minute. This legislation was updated in 2019 to commit us to 100% reduction of all greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, making the UK the first major economy to legislate for net zero emissions and setting the most ambitious 2030 target, at least a 68% reduction on 1990 levels. Since then, we've decarbonised our energy sector and driven down the cost of offshore wind, with renewables now powering around 40% of the UK's electricity production, up from 2.8% in 2000. In 2021, the UK had reduced its emissions by 48% compared to 1990 levels, the fastest in the G7 while growing our economy. Finally, we were honoured to host the COP26 presidency in 2021. The UK's Climate Change Act was passed with cross-party support in Parliament and has 3 main elements. The legally binding long-term target, which was updated in 2019. The UK updated this and committed to a legally binding long-term target which commits us to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Legally binding interim targets for 5-year carbon budget periods. In the medium term, policy decisions aim to meet the 4th, 5th and 6th carbon budgets which have been set in law. Our carbon budget delivery plan represents a firm commitment to delivering our carbon budgets and net zero and reinforces the policy delivered and progress made since the net zero strategy was published. The UK has overachieved against the first from 2008 to 2012 and the second from 2013 to 2017. And the latest statistics show that we're on track to meet the third from 2018 to 2022. The UK continues to value transparency and accountability and welcomes the Climate Change Committee's annual progress reports. The CCC's latest publication was in June 2023. As required by law, the government responds to these committees' reports. Our latest response is laid in Parliament. Under the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, the UK committed to reduce emissions by 20% compared to 1990 as part of a joint fulfilment agreement with the EU. Following EU exit, we remain committed to deliver on this joint target. We have overachieved by over 100 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. The UK has overachieved against targets in the non-traded sector between 2013 and 2020 and will not depend on purchasing international credits to achieve our targets. As you know, the UK is pleased to have submitted our final accounting under the Kyoto Protocol through the Kyoto Protocol True-Up. This slide sets out the UK's progress of decarbonising while growing the economy. And although outside of the Kyoto Protocol, I will just briefly update on emissions progress to date. Over the last decade, we have over-delivered the fastest reduction in emissions in the G7, down almost 50% compared to 1990. Technological advances have reduced costs, such as offshore wind costs down by 70% more than we projected in 2016, and have had a higher than forecast adoption of clean technologies like electric vehicles. This slide sets out the net zero strategy and the Chris Skidmore review. We recognise that managing climate change is a whole economy endeavour, which can see the huge opportunities net zero transition can bring with new industries and skilled jobs. I wanted to briefly touch on a key strategy which will help us get there. The net zero strategy, which we submitted as our long-term low emission and development strategy in 2021. In autumn 2022, the government commissioned an independent review of net zero. Led by former Energy Minister, the Right Honourable Chris Skidmore MP, the review was tasked with assessing the government's approach to net zero to ensure it was pursuing the most economically efficient path to meeting its climate change commitments, given the changed economic context. The review ran from September to December in 2022. It made 129 recommendations focused on 10 missions. In March, we committed to fully or partially acting on the top 25 recommendations. This includes delivering Great British Nuclear, providing clarity for investors through long-term roadmaps on CCUS and hydrogen, and a strategic review of the UK's international climate leadership post-COP26. This slide sets out what ambitions were made public in March 2023 and the changes since. The government responded to the review as part of a package of documents called Powering Up Britain at the end of March. The announcement sets out how the government will enhance our country's energy security, seize the economic opportunities of the transition, and deliver on our net zero commitments. Domestically, we announced how we've strengthened our delivery by focusing on the action we can take to ensure the UK remains a leader in the net zero transition and meets our carbon budgets. What steps the government is taking to achieve our vision to power the UK through affordable, homegrown, clean energy. And on an international level, we announced how the UK will deliver internationally on its climate and nature goals in this critical decade, a strategy on how the UK's commitment to spend £11.6 billion on international climate finance from 2021 to 2022 through to 2025 to 26 is being delivered. We also touched on the UK's world-leading financial services sector to support our climate and environmental objectives. And we announced that we'll be consulting on a range of potential policy measures to mitigate future carbon leakage risk and ensure UK industry has the optimal policy environment to decarbonise. Since then, the Prime Minister announced in September 2023 a fairer and more pragmatic approach to meeting net zero that brings people along with us. We remain confident that we'll still meet our legal targets and our international commitments. The Climate Change Committee have stated there is no material difference to emissions reductions in our plans to net zero. This slide sets out our commitment to transparency and notes the benefits of the international assessment review process. I want to note the huge value the UK sees and derives through the international assessment and review process, encouraging us to transparently communicate on our climate action. We welcome how this process has guided improvements to our reporting practices, and we strive to continue to learn from this process. The UK remains committed to transparency, which holds us all to account for the delivery of the commitments we make. We've seen the effects of climate change even more acutely in recent years and the effects it has had on populations globally. Now, more than ever, it's important that parties are more transparent and ambitious in meeting our long-term targets and to ensure that we keep 1.5 degrees alive. Every action counts, and we must recognise the work that we've accomplished so far while working towards faster and cleaner decarbonisation. In April of this year, we welcomed the UNFCCC expert review team to assess our performance on transparency and reporting. We had a great week with the reviewers. It was fascinating to learn about all their individual expertise. Their dedication to transparency is inspiring. Mr. Stewart, the Minister of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, was delighted to meet with the expert reviewers and set out the importance the UK holds in ensuring our reporting is transparent as possible. In particular, improved outcomes we saw as a result of the review were collaborating and learning from the review team on how we can strengthen our future reports, such as increasing the clarity of our reports by including geographical scope of our mitigation policies. It's made us consider how best to store and share information and decisions between teams. I know members of my team have also found the collaborative sessions between parties sharing their successes and challenges of reporting extremely helpful. And as we move towards Paris Agreement reporting, the UK will continue to support the UNFCCC's ambitions on transparency and on implementation of the Enhanced Transparency Framework. The UK is proud of the progress we have made, and we look forward to contributing to what must and will be the decade of implementation to ensure that we keep 1.5 alive. And we know that there are always ways to improve our reporting. We look forward to answering your questions. We've already received many interesting written questions, and I personally look forward to answering your questions in the session at COP28. Thank you.